with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more Saturdays with Renee.
Greetings. Welcome, everybody, to episode 98 of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball, the other Jared, and we are joined today by the Jared Ware of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, as one of our special guests. Well, good morning. Welcome, everybody. Please like, share, subscribe, support the platform on your way in. What's up, good people?
What's up?
What's up? I'm excited for this and tomorrow. You are the original Jared. Like, both you're born before me and you've been doing this longer than me. So that is a little bit disrespectful, I will say.
No, it's hey, listen, when you've been surpassed and it's been earned, it's not a problem. So this is not this is much more akin, I would say, humbly speaking, if we're doing the Jared's thing, to Michael maybe being surpassed by Kobe. This is certainly not the fake imposed LeBron.
Oh, here we go. It's always.
Where it's just given before it's earned. So if anything, it's been earned. Anyway, it's all good.
I definitely reject the Kobe narrative, first of all. So, he definitely did not surpass Michael. So
He didn't. I'm just trying to.
He was just trying to come up with something.
I'm just, but the way, look, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole because Renee has I'm sure done her own and has led us into a much better one. And yes, tomorrow we are continuing this conversation that we're going to start here in a minute with our other special guest on Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. And I do like these, to keep it NBA related, back-to-backs. I like these home and homes, home and aways.
It's working out. It's working out. But so just for the record, a couple of things. One, Jared Ball almost got beat up by both me and Jared Ware because we start having all these conversations about talking to Samantha, and then we looked up and Samantha was on with Jared Ball, and I was like, what just happened? I thought we were doing this double conversation. But in classic JAB fashion, he had forgotten all of those text messages, which happens.
But it's all
good.
But it's also that there are all these others. Like, I honestly didn't realize that till literally a second, because these other side conversations have been going on.
The real problem is JAB is too popular. Everybody wants to be in the room with Jab. Look,
no,
it happened. Look, all I know is I sent a text that said, we're still going to be good to do our talk with Samantha, right? And you answered and said, absolutely. And so I wrote back and said, good, because I was about to be mad at you. And you were like, oh, we can't have that. See, look, he don't even remember. You see the face he's making right now? Go scroll up. You'll see it.
I'm sure you're correct, but it's just, it's that from, but Samantha was also saying, I'm having these discussions with you, millennials, and Renee, but then there was like this, but then she was like, but I want to do this other thing. Like so she's like, and as I'm sure she'll talk about when she joins us, Samantha is, as I'm interpreting it, having this I'm finally getting, into the other parts of the world thing. And so I feel like I've been just following everybody's lead. So
look, in the end, it has worked out like in a way that I don't think I would have ever anticipated, because your conversations with Samantha have allowed me to really have like this baseline understanding that I think I needed to have in order for us to have the conversation we're going to have today. So this all worked out like grand scheme, but I couldn't miss the opportunity to tease you because, you know, that's what we do. So, yeah.
And there's more. There's going to be more.
Listen,
So
the
like,
Andor thing.
the Andor thing, and we'll get to it. I've been rewatching it and rewatching it, and it's I'm going through my own set of changes. As again, Dr. Burrows is in the chat. This is how big the moment is.
I know. Look,
Dr.
wait.
Burrows is even
I
in the
just say
chat.
one more thing, and then we can bring Samantha up because I don't want to take up too much time. But I just want y'all to know how my mother dissed me the other day. So, my mother, who watches everything religiously, and sometimes will watch things twice because that's what she does, right? I said to her, okay, I'm going to send you the links for the other conversations between Jared and Sam because I think you need to watch them before we all go on Saturday. And I also did an interview on WBAI, so I'd sent her that link too. So she writes me to tell me she can't get to the third link because it's on Jared's Patreon. So I was like, okay, like no big deal. Like I'll text Jared and get, and she was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to sign up for his Patreon. I was like, okay, cool. So then she texts me and she was like, I was so excited. I left a comment. I was like, you left a comment? My mother never engages. Like she watches, she's on the sideline. She is not engaging. So my mother, who has religiously watched us on Saturdays every single week, sometimes twice, who has never left a comment, left a comment for Jared. I was like, what the hell? But it's all love. We're all family now. So it's all love.
I just want to also wish Renee a happy belated birthday, and I think the chat should do the same. This conversation was part one was almost yesterday, but
it was almost yesterday.
Yeah,
Yes.
so,
Yes.
Anyway,
that is right. Again, happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
And yeah, folks should definitely big up Renee for that as well, as the comedy in the chat has already begun. But
I'm in
salute to moms.
my last year of 40s, man. My last year of 40s. It's wild.
Oh man. Yeah. I had an existential crisis moment. Talk about midlife, though I'm well past midlife at this point, but midlife crisis that we'll have to talk about one day when we have more time at these all-day faculty meetings yesterday.
The text messages were.
I had all day to think about my life choices, and I was just like, oh.
The text chat yesterday was great. It was great. Not gonna lie, it was great.
The meetings are out of control. So, but okay,
all right.
We'll just leave that out there for a minute.
Right. I guess no further delay, right? Let's just do it.
Let's bring back to the show the happily good from my vantage point. Happy to see very busy Samantha Youssef, who has a shorter emerging academic career after a long career in animation in the Hollywood universe, Disney included, and/or specifically even, or Rogue One, I should say, specifically. But it's good to see you again, Samantha. Welcome back. And welcome to Saturdays with Renee.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. And also happy birthday. Birthday.
Thank you. So typically we let our guests introduce themselves. And so for folks who, for whatever random reason, this is the first time they're seeing you, if you could introduce yourself and tell the folks where you are, where you've been, how you got here. We've basically started skipping intros for Jared Ware because I just feel like if they don't know who you are at this point, like they're lost in the sauce anyway. So we're good. But Samantha, if you could, that's the best way to start.
Okay, I'll try to keep it kind of brief. I have worked in the industry, specifically in like feature animation and visual effects productions for the last 2 decades on the artistic side. And I started off, I guess, as a hand-drawn character animator at Disney, but then my career kind of moved into doing art direction and essentially, I don't know, being like an artistic overseer of a lot of these productions, working with different departments and helping make sure that there's an artistic through line. And yeah, I don't even know how to define it because it kind of got pushed into a position that is a bit unique, and it gave me the opportunity to kind of move beyond like all the silos and tiers and walls that we are generally restricted in when we're working. So I'm Palestinian and Ukrainian, that's my background, and I think that also has contributed a lot to my perspective on how I'm seeing the industry now and stuff. And I think, is that good? Is that a good
that's
intro?
That's perfect. And I'll just add for folks, only because I've been watching all your conversations with Jared, that you are Canadian, correct?
Yes.
You live in Canada, which also adds a level, being on the outside, but on the edge, on the edge of empire, in a place that likes to pretend it's not empire, but it's definitely empire. Which
like gaslighting central. Yes.
Right. So I don't know, Jared's, as in the both of you, if you had an initial question, but one of the things for me that I think Samantha has not had a lot of time to do is to kind of dive into being. There are two rows here. There's being a woman in the industry, which is its own, I can only imagine, like level of madness that you encountered as a woman in the industry. And then also being a Palestinian in the industry once they realized that you were a Palestinian, which I think is also another story that you haven't had some time to get into. So I don't know. That's kind of one of the things that I would like us to start with. I don't know if either of you had another preliminary question that needed to be asked before that. And I don't know which one. I can't imagine either is going to be easier for you to talk about, Samantha. And I please feel free to share as little or as much as you want to share about, either of those lanes. But one of the things that I am most, I think, touched by of your story is that you kind of seem to me to have hit this moment of, oh, I'm not doing this shit anymore. Like this is not, like, I'm not staying. Like, I'm not doing this shit anymore. And I am fascinated by like that moment. But I feel like before we can even get to that moment, we need people to understand what it was like for you being in that industry as you, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I think maybe I'll start. I'm trying to figure out how to, because it is in a weird way, it's kind of compartmentalized in the way that you like they didn't, like they overlap and they don't, because of the way I had to navigate being in this industry. So I guess I'll start with the experience as a woman, and then I'll talk about the experience as a Palestinian. So I guess, especially it didn't occur to me that this would be an issue when I was really young, like when I was, I don't know, starry-eyed and sort of moving towards starting to really imagine a career for myself as a Disney artist, that maybe that's possible and maybe I could go to school to study it and stuff. I was very aware that there were almost no women in the industry. That like knowing the history better too, like I didn't find this out till later, but you know, like even Disney himself, like he just wouldn't let women be animators. They could be what they called ink and paint girls, you know, the people that do the outlining on, like when they use those old cells. I don't know if like people are familiar with that, when they use those transparent cells that the characters would be on as a layer on top of the background, and women were allowed to sort of do the paint by numbers kind of thing on those cells, but they weren't allowed to have creative positions. There was this woman named Mary Blair, like in the 50s and stuff, that she was a really amazing illustrator. So she was kind of an exception to the rule. Like she did do some creative, her art style is, if you think of the films like Alice in Wonderland or Cinderella, when they kind of went through that art style, that was because of her. But basically there weren't a lot of women. And I guess, you know, as a millennial, like when you grow up, like there was kind of that period too when I was growing up, that there was this consciousness that like women had to sort of fight for a space to be kind of equal. And so I kind of accepted it as normal, but I imagined that that wasn't the case anymore. Like we're a modern society now or something. And so it was interesting because even when I got into school, we were 100 people that were accepted into, approximately 100 people that were accepted into the program. And we were like a handful of women, like maybe like you could count on one hand. And so even in school, it was a bit of like, it was just such a frat boy culture. And that's kind of been encouraged throughout the industry. Like people in the industry sort of carry on like they're in college, and there's no expectation for people to grow up, because I guess people just, you're just kind of left to be creative. So nobody monitors you. Nobody, like they're getting better at it now, but they didn't used to even have these HR protections or like diversity, like I don't know, nothing like that existed. And they didn't want to, I guess, police the creative department, because they're like, just let them, you know, do their thing. So when you even go into the work industry, people behave just like college. Like people would be staying late, drinking, treating you in the workplace like as if you were all in school together, you know. So even their personal boundaries were kind of like how they would have behaved in school. So school already, you know, I was like, even when I was in school, I had people that were already like, even like just so much inappropriate stuff, like already, like, cause it's just such it's also a lot of people that, I don't know, it's just like, it's like something about this like geek culture or something that it's almost very chauvinistic in a way. Because I'm not sure exactly like the psychology behind all of that, but even when I was in school, like I had there was like someone that had stalked me. Like one person found out where I lived, and he was like waiting for me to come home at my apartment building, and he was angry that I was home later than he expected, because he knew when I left school. So he was like, how come you weren't here already? And he was like, so there's just this weird, this was already happening. Like it was just very weird in school. And so the few women that we were already very conscious about, you know, that we were supposed to wear baggy clothes because we weren't supposed to ask for any attention. But then if you were too frumpy looking, there were so many opinions that you're looking too frumpy. But if you wear something too feminine, then there was opinions that you were asking for attention. Or so this was sort of the culture even at school. And I kind of just thought, oh, it's just school, so it'll be better when I get into a professional space, you know, like Disney or something. And then getting into the studios, the American, and I think it's also just maybe because people are worried about lawsuits or something, but the American studios, from what I understood, at least when I was fresh out of school, they seem to have better work ethic behavior. But the studios that were located around the world were, they didn't have any of that. Like I was being like really badly sexually harassed by my supervisor. And when we had these sort of end of project reviews that I had to fill out, and I literally had documented like these events happened, this event happened. And basically whoever was in HR, they had just shared it with all their mates because they were all mates with each other. So he knew that I wrote that report, and then I started getting, you know, picked on by other people for like, you know, making him look bad or something in a report. And I don't, like, again, we were like, this was when I was at the Australia studio, and it was so far removed. Like, I don't know if like official Disney administration would have like come down on this or not. Like if they had been, this could, like, I don't know, but it just, things just really operated differently abroad. And Disney, when I first, like, I did training, a bit of training in Orlando, but in the early aughts, it, like, Disney didn't do any, like, they were after, I think it was Home on the Range was the last production. Like I wasn't in the industry yet when Home on the Range came out, but I think it was the last production from the Los Angeles studio, and then everything else was being done like in Paris and in Australia and in some of their other locations. And actually the American studios weren't producing any of the 2D animation at that time, and it was sort of being redirected. Like the energy was going into, I think they had recently also acquired Pixar, and there was, you know, an attempt to try to get the people in the American studios to do 3D work. So all of the hand-drawn stuff, if you wanted to stay in hand-drawn, wasn't being done there. And so there, like, it was just this constant, like, you know, people asking me to sit on their laps during meetings, and it didn't, like, as a woman in the studio, like on the day-to-day thing, you know, like I kind of, you know, alluded to this, I think in one of my other talks, but the, like, even like being a woman is like the worst position, like more than any kind of like racist or any kind of other marginalization, because it's such a frat boy culture that even if you're like, you know, Black or brown, you're going to be sitting at the table with all these guys, and nobody ever said anything in my defense when a director would you know, treat me like that. It was I was being inappropriate because I wouldn't sit on his lap, and I got in so many fights all the time, like, because I just didn't want to do those things. So I feel like, you know, it kind of, like, the reality of what it was becoming very apparent to me. Like, so just to kind of jump ahead to that thing where I just couldn't take it anymore, the reality was sort of becoming apparent very early on. But the way that we work on films is that, or at that time, it's a bit different now. As animators, we would get like cast, like you almost do an audition for every character, because like you are the actor in the film. So you put your work together and you apply for the next project. You pick who you want to, what character you would want to work on, and you put them in order. Like, this is my preference. And, you know, if you have enough status or whatever, you might be able to get your pick, and you sort of put together your like audition tape basically of the scenes you've done, and you try to, you know, get, so we do get typecast when we're inside the studio. So I kept always thinking like, oh, like on another project, sometimes it's a completely different team, or it could be at a completely different studio location. So that kind of kept me hoping for something better for probably about 5 years or so, you know, that you just kind of keep hoping like the next project. And, but that kind of thing never went away. And a lot of it, there's the, like, I don't know if it would be called macroaggressions or microaggressions. There's like the macroaggressions where people are literally like, they want you to sit on your lap. Or I had one director that at one point he had brought in like a production assistant, and she was very busty. And because I wouldn't sit on his lap, it's like he'd come by all the time and try to tell me that the reason he hired her was because he likes looking at her chest, like as if it was going to make me jealous or something. Like that was kind of, you know, his attitude and stuff. So, and some things like would get even worse. Like sometimes I really like felt like, you know, if I got cornered alone in a room with somebody, like sometimes, yeah, like I was in positions where I felt, you know, very afraid. But I guess you kind of think, because it's this very like liberal environment, and there's always like this sense of like, oh, but it's just that one person. It's not the system. It's not the structure. It's like just these kind of exceptions. But like, yeah, so that was just like always popping up. And then and I just remember even being like on one project, and I was literally, it was a sequel, but I was working on a character that was like from the original film, like one of my most favorite characters. Like I was so excited to work on this character, you know, and everything. And I just remember like going into my because we all had these little like mini studio offices, and we could close the door and have some privacy and stuff. And I just remember going in there and closing the door and just ghosting out of myself, because I'm there drawing at my Disney desk, drawing this character because we have to get through quota, and I'm just crying. And that was like 6 months of like trying to get through it. And this part of me just like, it was like this, you know, spiritual moment or whatever, where you're just watching yourself and you're like, this is, you know, the dream of it. And so at one point there was one project, you know, and the studio is closed now, but it was like, I just got to the point where there's one project where I was assigned to this other team, and it was actually the character I wanted, but not the supervisor that I wanted. And after and the first day of it, he kind of just said to me, like, I just want you to know, because of that report that I had done, that I filled out. He asked me to come into his office, and he's just like, I just want you to know that you can expect the same treatment from me as you got from this person. And he's just like, that's all, you can leave now. And that was all that he said. But it was like, it was, you know, so I handed in my resignation like the next day, because I was like, I'm just kind of done. But then what ended up happening, because of like, you would always be the first, like, you're not part of their group. So and this started in school. Like, I was in a very competitive school, and so to get that Disney position, you had to be the best. And then when I got into Disney, just to survive there, I had to, like, nobody would help me, so I just would sit there in the archives, learning, teaching myself, going to every workshop, doing, like, so I just got really good. And when I was there, I was like constantly having other people, like people that weren't harassing me, I guess, but other artists constantly coming up to me and asking me to help them and teach them and help them with their scene and help them with this. So when I left, it left a vacancy that they had been relying on me for. And so they were willing to negotiate conditions. And so I basically just said, well, I'm going to be a contractor and you can be my client. And that was, so they made that exception. They don't usually do that. Most people have to be in-house. Because they also own you. I think I heard you guys bring this up. I think Renee, you even brought this up about that idea that Disney like owns everything you do. Like, literally, if I drew a sketch for a friend on a napkin, like, technically my contract would say that they own that, you know? So, and because they train you so much, that's how they rationalize it, because so much of your development comes from their academy, their training, their thing. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with all of that, but that was how it was rationalized to us in our contracts. And they generally turn a blind eye, like if you do a little sketch for your family member or something. But so that was another thing, that because then they would be my client, they couldn't really, you know, do those things, but we'd have like extensive NDAs and all this stuff. But so that felt workable to me, because then I felt like I can sort of keep it at arm's length, but still do a job that I had heavily invested in, that I had trained really hard for. Because school, we had like 80, 90-hour weeks. Like, it was, you know, it was just so competitive. And you define your, like, I think when you're doing these things, you also define yourself by it. And so I'll just rewind a little bit too, because so that was sort of my turning point, was that. But then I continued, and because I set up the situation that way, it allowed me to start working with other studios, that they could be my clients too, that I could, or like, you know, like a gaming studio would invite me to come in and help supervise or like oversee a project. So as long as I wasn't disrupting any of my NDAs, like, this became like, now I had a bit more autonomy, a bit more agency. And I got paid better, and I liked, I kind of felt like that was a way that I preferred navigating it. And that's where I also started seeing that across the board, even as a woman, all these studios have this culture. Like, this is like across the industry. It's not unique to Disney. It's even worse in some other places. And I would argue in the 3D spaces, sometimes it could potentially be even, well, actually, I'm going to take that back. That's not true. I think it's pretty bad. And because we're the behind the scenes people, we don't have, like, I can't be like, I don't know, what's her name? if the like some of the actresses that really like came out for hashtag Me Too and stuff, that they could do that because they have 70 million followers, like, or 7 million or something like that on their on their, they have so much support from the public, whereas nobody knows who we are. Like, we just basically, you come out or you complain about these things and it's just a career shutdown. So that, like, that was always really hard to navigate, but at least being a contractor, I felt like it puts me in a position that it's a lot easier for me to walk away and to maybe have other clients or whatever. But then I guess I'll maybe, so that's sort of where I was sitting, and maybe I think it's probably a good time to talk about being a Palestinian in that, because they'll both come together to where I ended up.
So now we get to the good news.
The good news, yeah.
And just very quickly, I want to make sure that people, I don't want people, because I'm watching in the chat start to happen, like, I want people to understand that when you talk about being a woman in the Disney space, presenting as you present, like, this is a personal experience. And so people sometimes, I think, get caught up in the, the comparison of saying, like, which type of oppression is, like, worse. And I heard you say it, but I think you were mostly talking about the fact that if there's a Black man at the table while this is happening, they're not helping you in the moment that these things are happening. So I want people to, like, try and like don't get caught up in like the whole, like, well, she said it's worse as a woman. Like, she's a woman, so she can only speak about her specific experience. I just don't want people to get caught up in the whole thing. So.
And maybe just to clarify also, the structural problem, like that's the thing. Like, I would argue that racism is worse as a structural problem across Disney, because even when you think of who they're allowing into the studio space, right? Like, to be an artist at Disney, who they're allowing inside, that's obviously, that's where there are those conversations. But there were certainly more like, just like if I were to say, like, a Black American man, there were certainly more Black American men than there were women at the studio. But if you were a Black American woman, I've never seen one in the studio. And also, like, there's an interesting, like, I don't like them because they are liberal, and it's kind of like they're like one of those progressive except Palestine kind of groups. But there's a group, like, Women in Animation, I think they started in California, but they would do these sort of studies every year and just talk about, even like how many women are coming out of school, which has increased incredibly. Like, I even noticed that when I would go and speak at schools. Like I said, we were a handful when I was in school, but then in the last few years, like, I see more women even in animation programs than men, and yet women are like 5 to 10% of the people being hired, even though 60% of the graduates are women. And and Black women, it's even, like, exponentially worse. So that is, I do want to say, like, that's part of the problem too, is like, it's the gatekeeping that is really racist. But then when you're in the studio, like, again, like, I got in because I'm more white passing, most likely too, and so so once you're in there, then you're in a space where it's really more about, like, masculine, there's more of this, like, kind of masculine frat boy camaraderie that's happening.
I so appreciate
does that, like,
that was, and that answer of, I never saw a Black woman, it creates an understanding that I think people, like, there is no one for you to ask because they're not there, right? Like, so I just, so now I'm like doubly glad that I said what I said, because now this even changes the dynamic for what people are understanding about your experience. This is wild.
Yeah, thank you
but thank you. So we were going to turn to, and I just want to point out the fact that you are Palestinian and Ukrainian, given the times right now, like how like exponentially more like fascinating this is. But anyway,
yeah, no,
so you were gonna make the turn, and I'm sorry that I distracted, but I wanted to make
no. This is actually like a really great, like, I thank you. And yeah, because the thing is that the I've always been very, I have a love-hate relationship with my Ukrainian Palestine background. I'm not ashamed of my heritage on, you know, either side, but this hypocrisy that people are calling out right now has been the hypocrisy of my life. Like, I've only been accepted in spaces provided that I'm only Ukrainian. And so coming back to, like, I'm not necessarily, like, I'm not proud of it, but I didn't know when I was growing up, like, I didn't know a world where I would ever be allowed to be Palestinian, ever. Like, because where we grew up, like, we come from, well, first of all, like, I mean, I'm not practicing anything, but the heritage or the ancestry of my family comes from the Christian Palestinian denomination. So, and my father was a Nakba survivor, and he didn't have like anything, and he had a whole like very complex story even to get out. Like, and our family is in the 48 borders. And they're still there, and he, you know, for him, like, because at in his time too, if you were a Palestinian or is what they will call Israeli Arabs, they also limited like what you were allowed to study, and you know, you could only, like, even for him, apparent, like, I think, again, I don't have the documentation for this, but what our family says is that my dad was the first Palestinian that was even allowed to attend university inside the Green Line. So, and he met Anne Frank's dad, and but again, I think he was like the token, like, you know, the token Arab that, you know, they sort of make this whole thing of like campaign around or something. But he wasn't allowed to take like a full curriculum of course load. So he eventually was able to get a scholarship or get to the US, and he moved to New York, and he lived in his car, and he showered inside the hospital and at the university, and slept in his car, and built this life where he was, you know, he's living in the Bronx, and then he moved to Chicago, and then eventually he moved to Toronto, and then he moved to Montreal, where he met my mother. But he was very alone. So sorry, the reason that I'm giving that backdrop is that, you know, when I look at all I didn't know we were so many in the world until after October, until seeing people on social media. When I lived in Spain, my landlord was Palestinian. It was like the first person that I met that was outside of my family. And I mean, we had family members that I knew, but in my community, in my life growing up, like, my mother also, she didn't, you know, come from like a you know, I don't know, upper class background or anything. And they both trained to be doctors. And so they were able to make a better life for us. And they wanted to send us to a really good school. And so, because, like, you know, and they could afford a place in a slightly more affluent neighborhood. Turns out this neighborhood, it was like the political center of Zionism in Canada. This is where the person that invented the birthright program came from. It's where Kamala Harris went to school for a bit when she went in high school. There's like a whole so the people I went to school with were like the kids of politicians and prime ministers and lobbying groups and like CEOs and we didn't want to go to this school, but my parents really wanted us to go to a good school, and that's how they understood it. It was a good like private school. But even when before we went into elementary school, we were already removed from so many like kindergartens or pre-kindergartens, because they would say, where are your parents from? And we'd say we were like, my dad's Palestinian. And they said that we were lying, that we were spreading hate crimes, that our parents were teaching us to be terrorists. So we would get kicked out of the schools. So we learned from that age that if we wanted to be able to go to school or do all these things, we couldn't talk about it. So all that I could be was Ukrainian. That's all that I was allowed to be when I went into school. So I grew up in that situation. And that's part of, I think, why I clung to Disney for so long, because for me, I was like, by the time I was 12, I just couldn't wait to get out of Canada. Like, I didn't know about the world or anything, but I just knew that like I was not accepted here. This was not a place that I would ever feel was my home, because it was so conditional. It was so like, there was just this terror of people finding out, because there was always backlash when you told somebody, like if I ever did feel comfortable to tell someone, it was always met with a very negative reaction, or at best a very uncomfortable one, you know, like, oh, we have to, sorry, but like you can't come to our birthday party because we have a Jewish friend that's coming, which like, you know, just like these kind of like weird things that was the, like, it was just a very, the country is very Zionist as a whole. So I just felt like I couldn't wait to get out. And then I was seeing Disney, like I loved art, like I was always escaping in my art. And I think I saw Disney as an opportunity, because I saw that they would travel around the world, you know, to make these films, that they'd go to like other countries to study the culture or something. I mean, this is all cultural appropriation, but in the way I saw the world then, I just saw it as a great opportunity. And so part of the reason also that I kept sticking out these projects is because like I didn't want to go back to Canada. Like that was just like so for me it was this constant like, do I stay here or do I go back to this country that I just, once I was out of it, I just didn't want to be there anymore. And I knew also like that I couldn't tell people in my industry that I was Palestinian. Like I was very conscious of that, and that also became very clear early on, because you know you did have people like Jeffrey Katzenberg when he set up DreamWorks, and he's a board member of the ADL, so a lot of their internal studio diversity training comes from the ADL, you know, and stuff. So and there were so many people that I was working with at the studio that were suddenly going through, in this early aughts period, that were going through a process of changing their legal names to a Hebrew name as well. So I kind of was aware that like this is what I was surrounded with, which I wasn't, you know, it just didn't occur to me that's, you know, I didn't believe these kind of these kind of ridiculous tropes that like Jewish people control the world or something like that, you know. So I wasn't going into Hollywood thinking that was the case. I still don't think that that's the case. But there was this very strong like Zionist, you know, element, and even and I guess when I and that's the thing, when I started working in London, like especially on the, like when I got into the Star Wars projects, because a lot of them were being done in London, and then I was living in London for a while, and London was the first time I could just tell people I was Palestinian and it was fine. Like whether they were Jewish, whether they were like a liberal Zionist, like they'd still be like, we could have a conversation about it, you know, or whatever. Like it wasn't received as badly as it would be received, like say in Canada. And then I think some people in the States, I'd say a lot of the Americans, I started noticing this weird thing when I was in the States. If I ever did tell somebody that like, you know, I felt like it was somebody that I could tell, they usually thought I was Pakistani. Like they'd hear Pakistani somehow, which was very weird to me, but that happened a lot. But I did feel very conscious of that in the spaces that I was in. And so, and also just, you know, because of my experience being a woman, like I had also developed this, it wasn't so much for the Palestinian thing, but I also developed this, I just didn't, like all these people act like friends all the time. Like there's just this very frat culture, and I just didn't want people knowing anything about my life. You know, like I didn't want them to have anything on me. And especially as women, they were always looking for reasons to be like, you slept your way into your position, or you did this, or like, and that was always the talk at the studio. Like, and nobody ever contested that. If there was a woman there and they're like, well, she only got the job because she probably slept with this person, and nobody would argue that that was an irrational thing to say. So yeah. And then when October, so this is sort of where I got myself to, but then I guess, you know, like in the last maybe 7 years, I started working for directors personally. I guess like all this work that I was doing. And when I started working for directors personally, what was interesting, and I think it's just what they do, that like directors want everybody to feel like they love you so much. Because I see this with celebrities. They're like, oh, I was chatting with this director and they were, you know, they like, and I think that that's actually just part of like what they do, but they treated me very well. They would call, and like I would just get a phone call on my cell phone, and it would be from this really like well-known director, and they would say things like, you know, we love your work, we think you're really smart, like I really want to keep people like you like in my circle. So it's like also the first time that I had people treat me kind of respectfully, but then I was kind of working for them, and then what I would do is just go, I'd be working across studios depending on, you know, like if the film was exporting animation to this studio, I would go there. But then if the concept art was being done in-house, I'd be working with the concept artist. And so I'd be doing whatever the director needed me to do to oversee the vision. But then I was in a space where I felt a little bit more like that's kind of where I got myself to in the end. But then when October 23 happened, and I've never been a big social media, like I never sort of interacted publicly with people, like, because, and that's another thing too, because there's so much, and I think I had internalized some of this too. You know, we kind of felt like there's a little bit of this ego inside where the only opinions that matter are the people, because we see so much speculation and analysis of what the public does. So we just kind of retreat into being like, yeah, but the only opinion that matters is like our peers, because we're the only ones that really know, like, you know, like there's this kind of elitism. So I think that was partly internalized in me too. Like I never felt a need to try to build a social media presence or any of those kind of things. But I did have like an Instagram, and I did have like some followers on it. So when October happened, and at that point I had also been doing a lot of, because I was a bit more independent, I had also been teaching. Like I'd built an online school and I was teaching, and I got invited to schools. Like I've like gone across Europe and Australia and North America and been invited to go and teach at these schools. And I had like, you know, at one point I had a waiting list of like 100,000 people for my courses, and people always gave me really good feedback. Like all these young animators, like they'd always send me gifts or like say things that they really appreciated things, and I really helped them. And like, so I really thought that, you know, I was really just seeing how dehumanized we were as Palestinians. That's like, you know, so I put it on my Instagram, like I'm Palestinian, and I thought that it would help, like, and literally from my own students and from people in my industry, I started getting so many messages that they hope that I'm raped, that I'm killed, that if they ever see me at one of our conferences again, they're going to rape and kill me. I would even start blocking them, and they would just make other accounts to keep, right. And I kind of feel like, especially with some of my students, I think a lot, because nobody would ever help them learn the way that I was teaching them how we work. Like, because we'll talk about the culture, I guess, a bit more, but even how we teach each other. So I think a lot of people saw me as like a mother figure to them, or to help them achieve their career aspirations. I think there was just like a personal level of betrayal that conflicted with that. But yeah, so excuse me. I think like by the time that I got that backlash too, I had already been taking steps to try to find a way to exist in this industry. So it wasn't hard for me to just finally be like, you know, I'm done. And like I said to Jared, I had started my graduate studies in January 2023. And part of my reason into going into that was because over the last few years, it wasn't even just my personal experience. I was starting to see things that were a bit weird. And I was also starting to really recognize that I had a lot of brain fog because I had been in such a liberal space for so long, and that I had been raised in Canada. And I really just felt that I need to get a better education. Like I need to get exposure to literature that has just been outside of the scope of what I like, you know, like I needed to expand that. And so that was all part of it. But and that's where it's brought me to now.
Sorry. Let me take a breath. So one, thank you, because it is not often that people are willing to share that experience, right? Like that, what you went through is horrifying, right? Like, and there's nothing, and I can't wait to talk to you after this so I can tell you a little bit more about like how my life ended up where it is right now. But like that experience of realizing that when you think that you have built up enough trust and respect and like I don't want to use the word clout, but just like, like that people respect you enough that if you say something that they won't turn into assholes, right? Like you get the you're like this is my opportunity to get people to understand, like, a Palestinian person and you respect them and you recognize their worth and their value. So don't act like Palestinians aren't human, right? Because I feel like in your head, that's what you saw coming, like this awesome opportunity to show people like this is like I am what Palestinian we're people, right? And then for it to turn into what it turned into, I can't even. So thank you, one, for sharing that. Two, I don't know, you mentioned that you still have family that's in Palestine, so I don't know how impacted they are by what's happening there. So I do hope like prayers and love, and I hope like your family
Thank you.
is okay, because again, just horrifying. But I'm so appreciative of your telling the story, because one, we need to hear it, and because two, we talk a lot here about like that moment, right? That moment when you think like, oh shit, like what like is this what's been happening? And so like we have these arguments and these conversations all the time about like, like when someone watches Malcolm X, like, and it sends them to go do research, and then they decide that they're going to become an organizer, like that's a moment like you have to take, right? And then you make the mistake of, I'm listening to Kahindi's book now about Malcolm X and realizing like what a complete disaster the book and the movie, and these are things that Jared and everyone's been talking about for years, but he tells it in a way that's really jarring. But recognizing these moments as important moments in life, and I'm sorry that you experienced it, but I gotta tell you, I am going to use the fact that you were able to experience this, but come back and use it for a reason to teach other people. And I don't know if you understand the value of that. And so I needed to say it because I need you to know the value in not going underground, not deciding like I'm just gonna go and like I'll keep working and I'll stick my head back in the sand, but to do what you're doing now. There is a value to that I need you to know, because it's important for you to know it. And then I'm going to shut up because I'm about to start crying and I'm like a disaster.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't feel very noble about it, because I think also, like, all of us, like I've talked, with other women, we've always talked about, just even just that experience, but that it's career suicide. Like there's no protection. So I kind of also just feel like I hit this point where I just don't care about myself anymore. Like I don't care about my career. I don't care about any of those things, because we're just seeing the consequences of it like so much that it's so insignificant if I have a career or not. But like, that's also why like I'm like I just don't even care anymore about like what all these colleagues or people would think, because I used to try to worry about how to navigate that all the time. And yeah, it just but it's yeah. Thank you for I feel like it's something that I just wish that I had more strength to have like come out and said it before, or yeah.
I'll just jump in. I mean, first of all, Renee, thank you also for kind of leading this conversation where you did today, to give Samantha also this opportunity to kind of like share this in full. Like, I know that she has shared little aspects of it with me, and she shared some aspects of it with Jared in their conversations, which people should watch all of. But also, I think because both Jared and my impulse is to like want to know, want to ask all these questions about the movies and the industry and all this kind of stuff, because it is so rare that we get a kind of insider perspective that is critical in the way that we are, right, of these industries. That often is kind of, I think, the thing that I'll speak for myself. It drives me, right, in terms of developing questions of like, oh, well, what do you think about, this? Like, and I think it's really powerful for you to have shared all of what you shared today. And a lot of people in the chat are just giving you a lot of love right now, Samantha. So I hope you get a chance to see those comments later.
Thank you.
But a couple of things like that you touched on that I just want to kind of raise up, because I know this conversation, we called it the Donald Duck does DEI, right? And there was this whole you reached out to me and Mtume, and I know you had been previously emailing with Jared about your paper on Black Panther. But you reached out when we did that collective conversation on how to read Donald Duck, and one of the things you said was like, I wish you all like had some of the insider kind of perspective on this conversation. And so I'm excited to kind of delve into that with you as well. And it's interesting because it's like one of the things that I realized I forgot to bring up in that conversation. And I was reminded afterwards, I did an interview with Alana Lenton on her book, The New Racial Regime, Recalibrations of White Supremacy. And she has a section on Disney and DEI, right? And she does it's short, right? But she's dealing with the right-wing backlash, right, that came around Disney going woke, right? And I put that in scare quotes, of course. But this idea, which I know is part of what we want to talk about today, that both in terms of the films that they've created, but also in terms of some of their internal practices, that Disney took on different DEI initiatives, right? And I think that Alana in her book does a good job of concisely breaking down how that like doing a check your privilege training for Disney workers would be kind of the least of their concern, in part because of the amount of labor exploitation that folks are facing as workers within Disney, right? And she also then talks about Walt Disney's historical relationship to Mussolini, his courting of like Nazi propagandists or animators when they came to the United States and stuff like this, right? And I think like it's a great, concise few pages that she writes on this, but it also, as we hear your story, like totally pales in comparison to kind of a human story of the amount of what that experience actually means for someone like yourself, right? Of being an animator in this company, and not just the company, but in an industry, right? That is kind of dominated in these ways, and where, I mean, as you were talking about people, about the different contexts traveling around the world, I was thinking of two things. One, like extraordinary rendition, right? This idea of the United States, like taking people to other contexts where they can torture them legally because the laws are different, but also of the show Succession, where there's like this discussion that there's an uncle or somebody who's a child molester, but he works for the parks and the like theme parks and the cruise lines. And so he would get away with it by going to all of these contexts where the laws would give him space to get away with the kind of abuse and stuff like that he was engaged in, and that this was like known by the company but went on for decades, right? And I think that it's just I mean, what you're describing is actually like a real life kind of version of that sort of corporate architecture, I think. And yeah, I mean, I don't have, I also was thinking about Weinstein and, of course, the Me Too stuff that you were talking about, but just, I think it's important to understand what you've outlined of just how pervasive these sort of things are within the culture. And yeah, so I don't know. I mean, Renee, I don't know where you want to go next with like the discussion of, DEI and everything, but yeah, those are just some of the things that stood out to me in all of what you laid out, Samantha.
If I could just
go ahead.
change topics, like with what you're saying, there is like all these, like, when you go into the studio, you're not really dealing with the executives and everything, but these kind of, like you're bringing up Weinstein, like all these kind of things, I don't want to get into any kind of legal situation, but this is like online that there are alleged cases against John Lasseter, for example. And again, like I'm just saying stuff that's actually already been published. He was like, it's alleged, and he claims it was misinterpreted. And then the response that happened, which we see very often, is that he doesn't get removed. It's like, just, you know what, just let things cool down, take a 6-month sabbatical, we'll figure it out, kind of thing. Like that's usually, like, I mean, that was what like Pixar asked him to do that. And then how they, and like now, despite these allegations, which I believe it's sort of an ongoing situation, he's now got another kind of CEO level job at executive level job at Paramount Pictures now. So there's kind of like a culture of like what I'm realizing, the more that I'm also getting more politically engaged, is that looking at, just even these things where they're talking about releasing these files, we're just seeing like similar patterns between similar people in similar structures, and it seems to go hand in hand. That kind of behavior seems to go hand in hand with this kind of thing. And there was, like, for example, there was that really big lawsuit that happened to Blizzard Studios in California, which was a gaming studio. And again, as artists, we can drift between all of them because the kind of work we do, like, we're not programmers, right? So like if I'm designing a character, I can design a character for a game or a feature film, or, we would use the same sort of logics and like training behind that. So they're all kind of similar cultures. And the irony is that, like I used to tell women, like young women, that if you're going to go and work at a gaming studio, go work at Blizzard, because it, like, despite the fact that it got targeted with this massive lawsuit, it's still one of the better ones. And that, like, so that's just, I just want to put that, not to give Blizzard props for it, but just to point out that a lot of these companies, and like Ubisoft, which I won't go into too much about it because I think it would really be better for our conversation tomorrow, because it ties in a little bit about what their role is with military industries as well. But this company has like a history of sexual assault allegations, and one of the CEOs, they just finalized a case in Europe for, I don't want to be misquoted, but like, for serious sexual harassment charges, like in the tens, if not, I don't know if it was 100 million or in the tens of millions resolution about this. But these kind of, now these cases are becoming more clear, but Ubisoft has had allegations for decades. And so, sorry, I feel like to what I just wanted to throw that in because you were sort of talking about the Epstein or the, like all these people, they just all seem to be friends or have similar cultural habits.
I just want to quickly echo the appreciation for the discussion, and then to quickly point out also that this again points to the fallacy that Renee and maybe a few others have been calling out for a while now regarding DEI, that never mind who it benefits in terms of class within any oppressed group, but the projection. And then in some of these even YouTube media criticism spaces, we see a lot where the white right will want to say, quote, go woke, go broke, and claim that this is why Disney films are failing when they're not even really failing at all. But it shows, again, from the perspective of an actual left, that the DEI claims are all absurd, that the projection in through cartoons or some other film that this industry or that this society cares about the diversity and the gender balancing and whatever is absurd, when, as you're describing, the very people within these spaces creating the work and the art are suffering every level of abuse that so it's I think, again, why there needs to, all of this is important to discuss, and just to consider that, again, when we're receiving these messages as an audience or a consumer base, and then in some cases driving political decisions based on it, that there's layers and levels of manipulation going on, and contradictions and hypocrisy. So that was it. Thank you.
And just quickly on that point too, you made the point there's no Black women animators that you would ever encountered in all of these spaces that you were in. And so it's like, what does it mean to get a white privilege training amongst a bunch of white men who are all like, or a group of men, right? When you haven't even like diversified the group of people who can be in the room, which is a basic sort of, DEI, like, again, like, I'm not saying that's liberatory or anything like that. I know we all have, our critiques of these kinds of, tokenization or whatever else, right? But the reality is that it is not it is very much not a space that is even aligned to diversification. It's just kind of a narrative thing that's going on maybe within some of the films and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a perfect example, that you would have Black princesses and Black women performers projected as this is now an advance in society, but no Black women behind the scenes involved with the production. Anyway, so yeah.
And I mean, I do have, like, I have to say, I have she's like one of my best friends. I don't want to, she's still working, so I don't want to, and she has a family, like, I don't have kids, like, she's got a family and all this stuff, but she is like brilliant. And we actually, she was in my school. She was one of these few women that got into my school with me. I knew her from school, and we reconnected actually since October 2023, because I was so scared of everybody. I was so scared of like what would happen if people found out I was Palestinian and everything. So I really kept myself very guarded. But she's always been like speaking out and advocating, and she's really talented. But she went into children's television, which is like, I have no, like, television is like, I almost feel like VFX, and I think this has to do a lot with the 3D thing. VFX, games, and feature animation, those circles tend to overlap more, but the television domain is like a different thing. But she's had her own, I don't want to speak for her, but she's had her own experiences that sort of, echo these kind of issues as well. And I think, for her, like, again, like, I can't speak for the spaces that she's worked in, but I don't imagine, I'm going to presume here a little bit, but I don't imagine that, I don't think that she's surrounded by people that present as she does, at least.
Yeah. And the other thing you mentioned, which I think is important, is that you mentioned that a lot of what you got in terms of diversity training and so forth was by the ADL, right? And I think that is also a very important point. I know, like, there's been a movement by teachers union to get them out, and that's been overruled also by like the executive council of, is it the NEA, Renee, I think? But
yeah, the NEA.
But like that is also, I mean, and of course the ADL is anti-Palestinian, but as like Jared, I think, has covered this over the years, folks like Dylan Rodriguez, folks like the Critical Institute for the Study of Zionism, like ADL is is an anti-Black radical. Like there's so much history of the ADL, like co-opting, also sort of informing on movements and so on. Obviously the demonization of people like Kwame Ture, which was mentioned in the chat, you know, and all of this stuff. And so I just think that's also important for us on the left to have an understanding too, is that, you know, this a lot of, I don't know, you know, what degree, but if your diversity, equity, and inclusion training is coming from the ADL, that has a very specific character to it, and it is not anything liberatory for sure.
Yeah, and I think also, like, because it came up when Jared and I were talking too, but they also, the ADL also wants a very specific, you know, vision of what Jewish people also can be represented as. So I would also argue that they're very, like, my feeling would be that they're also very anti-Jewish in that way, because if you are not, you know, they don't want those voices that contradict a Zionist narrative too. So it's, yeah, it's, and I can't, I just for legal purposes or anything, in case this comes back at me, I have no idea who is behind the training that is happening now at Disney. Like, when I went independent, in this experience that I had, we never had any kind of diversity training in the studio. You know, like I'd never seen it before. I had a friend that was an engineer, and they were talking about how they get these memos, or they have the occasional training of what's appropriate behavior. Like that never crossed our paths. I don't know how it is now at Disney, but I do know, like, at DreamWorks, with Katzenberg also being a board member, I know that was always very, like, present in that cultural space there too. Yeah.
Well, this is almost a perfect segue, because outside of wanting to make sure we gave space for you to talk about, you know, your experience and everything, it's all part of a like a throughway that I wanted people to understand, right? So when you speak to what we're about to get into, this whole, like, claims of DEI with Disney, right? It's coming from a person who, one, lived it, right? So you were in the space, so you know exactly who was in the space creating these things, making these decisions. And also, because you have this very unique experience that you have, you can get people to understand how propagandized they are. And this is coming from someone who loves Disney. Like, this is the sucky part of it, right? Like, the worst part of this whole thing is Disney has managed to use all of the heart and mind things that you talk about with Jared to kind of pull at the strings of people who are watching. So you get so invested in, like, you know, the story, and, you know, the Beauty Princess and the Black Mermaid and all these things. And then, like, you almost forget how shitty Disney is, right? Like, because you're so captured by, like, the thing that's happening in the moment before your eyes. And so for me, this is all part of trying to get people, you know, to free themselves from the propaganda. And this is not to say you can't go watch a movie and enjoy it, because this is what I get all the time, right? Like, why do you always have to do this thing? Like, why can't people just enjoy the movie? Blah, 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 blah. Like, go watch it if you want to, but remember that Disney is not trying to start a revolution, right? So any, like, you know, the thing I like to remind people, like, this whole thing with the Easter eggs and this is what the hidden story is, like, the most, and I was listening to you and Jared talk in my car, and you started to talk about, like, how people just, like, this idea that, like, you just get, you start to get so, like, deep down, like, thinking about the thing and who you're talking to, right? And who's presenting the idea. And until you recognize who's presenting the idea, you almost forget about, like, like looking at that and recognizing how much of a role that plays in the idea that you're getting, right? And you all started talking about the dude from Andor being on Jimmy Kimmel or whatever he was on, right? and so, you know, this whole idea of how we just get so distracted often by the thing that's on the screen, and then you start talking about, you know, the Easter eggs and the hidden meanings and all these things, and it's all part of the role of distracting you from paying attention to the fact that in the end, none of this is going to revolutionize you, right? So like I got in a lot of trouble about not being all hyped up about Kendrick Lamar's halftime show during the NFL Super Bowl this year, right? And I had to remind people, like, it's the fucking NFL. It is the halftime it's the halftime show of the Super Bowl of the NFL. Like, they are not trying to start a fucking revolution. And the reason that he's there doing this show is so that you can start paying attention to the colors and the dances and the da-da-da-da-da-da. Meanwhile, the dude with the Palestinian flag is like,
he was actually doing something revolutionary and they took him down.
Right. And they brought him up on charges. Like, he had to travel to court because he's now being charged for holding up a goddamn flag. Like, these are the things that I feel like it's so important for people to really understand, that the minute you start talking about the Easter egg or the hidden gem or the storyline, and you forget that Disney's job is to make a profit, and it does not give a fuck about revolution, because the revolution is going to stop them from making a profit. Like, they don't want revolution. So you're never going to get revolution from anything that any of these first world, first tier, you know, movies and productions give you. So that all being said, what I sent when I sent our first my list of like thoughts, I went through the list of Disney movies, like from the first one to the last one, right? And started and like looked at the movie name, tried to like, did I have to see this one, whatever, because I was trying to remember if Pocahontas or Aladdin was first. I couldn't remember which one was first. So Aladdin is. So Pocahontas
was before Pocahontas, yeah.
Right. So the movie Aladdin came out before the movie Pocahontas. I believe Pocahontas was like in existence in Disney as like a thing before the Aladdin movie came out. So people
because they would have been developing it. Yeah.
Right. So people get confused and that was my confusion, because technically Pocahontas was a Disney quote unquote princess at Disney before the movie came out. So the movie Aladdin came out first, but Pocahontas as a Disney princess was in existence first, which I didn't know until I fell down this damn rabbit hole. But anywho, so Aladdin was like a big deal because it was the first time they had like, you know, their brown princess and the brown character.
I was excited. Like when I was a kid,
when
I saw Princess Jasmine or something, and I was like, oh, like you know, and it even reshapes your own cultural memory. I think that's also why these films are so scary too, because, you know, I felt like I liked Aladdin for that reason, you know?
Right, and that's what they do, right? They excite you. So then you have Aladdin comes out, and everyone's, you know, excited. They've got a brown princess, and then Pocahontas comes out, and I said it in my email, like I'm almost like gagging in my mouth to even talk about like Pocahontas as a Disney princess, given that she was a 13-year-old who was raped by a white man who had stolen her. Like, it's a whole thing, right? Like, I don't even know how we ended up in this place where like Pocahontas is like a Disney princess, but
I can probably speculate on that a little bit.
So please do. So this is why we're having this conversation. So please speculate away.
Well, I know, like, you had referred, like, when you had sent some notes, like, you brought it to Aladdin as sort of being one of the first ones. I would say that just from, like, I think there's a couple forces that were going on that, one of them was the sort of corporate military takeover that was happening, because like Little Mermaid was like the first, like I think there's like a couple things, because Little Mermaid was the first one where they were putting some CG in. No, that's not true. Great Mouse Detective. They were starting to put these things in, but there was this period where it was very uncertain if they were going to keep the studio open, because the films that they were making during the 80s were not very successful. And a lot of that was also the cultural transition, because there were these animators called the Nine Old Men. I'm a bit of it, like, this is the thing, like, this was my life, you know. So there were these animators called the Nine Old Men that, I don't know if you've read about them or not, that they were sort of the gods of Disney animation, that really made Disney animation what it was, character animation, because like Disney himself was not really a great artist or anything. These were the people that even, you know, and they're glorified in a way, because they created the style of character animation that we understand today. They created the techniques, like how we do it, like all of that. So their last film, like that had any, some of them retired before, but the last film that actually had a couple of the nine, like of that group still working on it, was Fox and the Hound. And then it was the new generation, and this new generation that's in what we would call, I guess, the Disney Renaissance period. They were the ones that are like the first generation after the Nine Old Men. And so they were sort of getting their legs under them in the 80s. You know, they weren't very seasoned yet. They weren't, like, the stories just were not really great. And then something happened with Little Mermaid that it was very well responded to as well. And there was a conversation, I don't know if this is true or not, but on our side, the understanding was that the studio was literally potentially going to be closed. The animation part of Disney would have been closed, or they were looking at that, and then Little Mermaid just kind of revitalized everything. Now, I don't know if that's just credited to Little Mermaid, because there's also the element of them getting involved with 3D animation, which is a whole, I didn't realize at the time, another source of income for the purpose of research and development. So it's very possible that that's a mythology, that it wouldn't have closed after Little Mermaid because they needed artists to be involved in 3D development. But at least from how we understood it, that's what was happening. So I think, and Little Mermaid, because of its success, it set it didn't yet set the princess template inside how we were projecting films. And at this time, sorry, I should also add that until the studio went full 3D transition, there was still a bit of there weren't as many closed doors. There weren't as many, like the whole studio kind of had a sense of what was going on in the studio as artists. Like you could propose, we had like every 6 months, there would be like what they called sort of these pitch sessions, where any artist could come in with like a presentation and be like, you know, this is like, I have the idea for Pocahontas, and they would present it, and then it would get reviewed, and that could maybe be the film. So there was still a little bit of artist agency on what the films were going to be. And I think a lot of that too is like Little Mermaid just ended up being really successful, and it set a template, right? That like was like the musical, the little funny sidekicks. It just kind of set a template that was then just repeated throughout the rest of the Renaissance period, I guess. And I think they were still in a thing. They weren't yet like, at least on the artist side, I can't speak for the corporation, but on the artist side, there still weren't as many, like we weren't in that princess franchise mindset. I mean, this is before my time, but I'm a second generation, I guess. Like I was trained by the ones that were trained by the Nine Old Men. So I think like, you know, because after Little Mermaid, there was Rescuers Down Under. And then there was Beauty and the Beast. And then there was Aladdin, I think, if I'm remembering my order right. And I know from like all of the, like going through the archives and like learning from these people and watching what they said, at least internally, again, like I do feel like we're internally propagandized a little bit. So I'm taking all that history with a grain of salt. But I think that they were like, this is very, like, I use the Egyptologist, or this kind of British way of exploring the world. You know, when they go to like foreign places and then they come back and they want to tell their stories with all their stuff. This is like a very white culture of these kind of people in the studio. And so that is how they would get excited about, you know, doing this art. And so they were already in the mindset of doing that after Little Mermaid, because Rescuers Down Under in their mind was like, we're going to go and see Australia and tell an Australia story. And Beauty and the Beast was them going to France and telling a France story. So it wasn't that it started when the brown people came in, like this kind of way of looking for foreign stories and like just like it. And that came more because of their mindset, their way of thinking. This wasn't about, at that time, I don't think that there was any interest and there wasn't really an expectation for DEI at that time, right? It was still like in a time, I think, I mean, again, I was a kid when these films were coming out, but
yeah, no, you're right. And I just quickly, I'm hoping that people are like, first of all, that they're the 9 old white men is like, it has me like cackling on the inside. That's so hysterical. But you know, I want to make this like line for people, because you're right. Like, it started with Aladdin, and then it was Pocahontas, which was the telling of, you know, the Native American girl story, supposedly. And then it was Mulan, which was like, okay, now let's tell the Asian girl story. And then they went to Lilo and Stitch. So now we're going to tell the Polynesian Hawaiian story. And then it went to Moana. So now we're going to keep going with like the indigenous, and then we're going to go to Coco. And then
these guys love doing that because they're excited to explore art styles. Like we just want to, like, this could be a cool, like, that's what's exciting for us, is like trying out, like, appropriating different styles. It's very appropriation. It's more appropriation than recognition.
Right.
This may be
right. And so this is Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jay. Go ahead.
I just want to make one quick comment, which is like, I think Aladdin is actually kind of in this in-between space, because, like, I mean, first of all, like, look at Jafar or characters like this within the film. Like, it is a very Orientalist, film in itself. And, you know, they did have other versions of this, like, you know, they don't want Song of the South, for instance, on Disney Plus, but that is, you know, this attempt to kind of appropriate elements of Black culture and paint them a certain way, or something like The Jungle Book, right? And so there is this kind of like what you're describing is very much that, like, colonial, like, go into the jungle and come out and tell people the stories of other people. And I think, like, Aladdin, like, there's some space between how we get from Jungle Book, Song of the South, to Aladdin, to then, you know, and then, like, and Pocahontas, I would still put in that same realm, right, where indigenous people are a part of it, but the story is, like, distorted in so many ways. Yeah. And then, you know, then you get to, like, a modern world where you have, like, Coco and what's the other, like, some of the more recent ones.
Encanto is probably the one you're thinking about.
Encanto, yes, exactly. And so I didn't mean to get in the way of your question, Renee, but I think it's interesting because there's a lot of continuity throughout all of that, I think, but there is, I think, subtle shifts in representation over time as things become more problematic for them, and there's more pushback probably to certain representations.
Right. Go ahead, Sam.
No, I was gonna say, I think, like, Orientalism is exactly like the way that's like the best descriptor for it. From the inside, I don't see in the way that, if I were to think in the way that, like, I think when I'm working with these people, because I have to think in that, like, you know, that when we're approaching projects in that way, I don't think that in the minds of these artists, there was a difference between Aladdin and Rescuers Down Under. or Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. They were observing, they literally were just seeing it as like, because like for them too, it's like Beauty and the Beast was in France, right? So for them, it is part of this, like they're going to another country, and this sort of, and this was also what, you know, it was more exciting for the artists too, because in the 80s, like there was Great Mouse Detective, there was Black Cauldron. Those films were not like as visually and artistically exciting, and artists still had some kind of agency to control what the projected film, like what the film would be, to present the ideas. But I think that there's also something that I wasn't aware of at the time, but now that I've been doing more of this, like, you know, and like we'll expand on it, I guess, more tomorrow, more of this real, I'll leave it to 3D now, but this is obviously tied in with the military. But when the 3D integration happened, like, and 3D was a foisting, it wasn't a natural evolution in any way. So there was this transition happening, I guess, that was going on also maybe for decisions obviously outside of the artistic, like the studio space, that we would not have been knowledgeable about. We would just get a top-down thing that it's like, well, we need to try out this software. So it was the Beauty and the Beast ballroom, or the, you know, like the, and it was just constantly trying to force it in. Like, it was just like, well, what could we do with it? I guess we could do this. And then and I remember, because I was a little kid when Beauty and the Beast came out, and I remember, I still have this memory of seeing it on TV, like some, like, I don't know, after school special or something, like on regular TV, about the whole focus of the behind the scenes was talking about this ballroom and how they made it work. So that was also just the way it was promoted as like this big creative thing. But it was so uncomfortable. And all my teachers said that, and all my mentors said that. And I think, like, a lot of these films from these people's eyes, it is an orientalizing thing. And, like, for example, like Jafar as a character. I don't know if anyone's seen Thief and the Cobbler, but there was an animator named Richard Williams. He was responsible for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and, you know, Disney had collaborated with his studio in London, and the supervising animator, who was one of my mentors, like, I have an original Jafar drawing in my studio room. He was the supervisor of Jafar, and, you know, German American, and he worked under Richard Williams, and Richard Williams, like, lifelong project was called Thief and the Cobbler, and Jafar is styled after this story because of his experience with Richard Williams. So a lot of these films were coming at that time, coming from more of an Orientalist lens than a strategic DEI lens, because I see that more as like kind of a deliberate strategic thing. But because of this 3D overlapping that was happening, I think it's like the way to look at Disney also is like, it's like 3 different companies almost that happened in the same space. Because there's like 9 Old Men company, and then there was the Renaissance, and then there was the 3D. And like I said, 2D kind of got shifted out of the US for it to continue going. And then something about 3D, like, because I was trying to avoid 3D as long as possible. I was sort of clinging, you know, to 2D, and I refused to you know, let that go. So the 3D development continued to happen in the US, and very few artists were even there when it was going on, and most of us got shipped out. So even a lot of these LA guys went to Australia or went to France or something. And then I think in that shift, like the Eisner Katzenberg company that was taking over, this started getting more corporate. And then when we go into 3D, and it wasn't DEI at the beginning of the 3D things, because look at like the first success, like in my opinion, artistically or from the inside, the first successful 3D film, I would argue, would have really been Tangled, like outside of like not counting Pixar, but in Disney. So this is like very like, you know, the blonde European kind of princess, and they weren't even going for a country at this point. They actually, like, Byron, who was the director, and again, one of my mentors, he just went for like, they went to the theme parks, they went to Disneyland to take their inspiration of like these worlds and stuff. So I think, you know, the DEI thing started coming in later due to criticism, public response, and then going back, sorry, because I didn't address this and I had meant to, the princess thing. You know, I think they didn't know that the princess thing would be a thing right away, at least. And so, like, Little Mermaid was very successful, but then Rescuers Down Under was not so successful. And then they did Beauty and the Beast, and suddenly it was like another reinforcing, like, hey, there's something here. But products at Disney outside of the theme parks were not a big thing until Lilo and Stitch. Lilo and Stitch was the first one where they started designing a lot of toys and all this stuff. And I came into the studio, I had done some interning on that film. I was still in school, but I had, like, when I came into the studio after Lilo and Stitch, but a lot of the people that were there, like just even from these Orientalists, I guess, you know, they were just all very excited. They're like, we got to design some toys, and it was the first, and that sort of launched a product thing. And then my experience was then coming in when the princess thing became a thing, because even Mulan wasn't yet, or Pocahontas. Internally, at least, we didn't identify them as part of a princess family. The princess thing came sometime after they moved us out of the US, after it started getting more corporate. And then I remember being in Australia at one point, and it was around the time I quit too, because like I was just like, I can't deal with any of this anymore, because I literally, like, the week, I think it was the week before I handed in my resignation, we were called into one of our corporate meetings, and they were like, so our princess franchise initiative is going really well, so we're going to do Cinderella 4, because they had just, and they were doing these sequels, like there were sequels that were done by the feature animation team, and then there were also sequels now that were being outsourced because they were trying to get them out on like direct to video release things and stuff, and so they were being outsourced to some other like television studios or like other studios that they weren't even all in-house, and it was the first time Disney was doing that too. So I think the princess franchise started becoming a thing probably somewhere around 2000, like something around there. It came out later, and then it became like this obsession. Then it became a marketing obsession, and then all these princesses started getting rebranded with like makeup and fancy dresses, and then it became like so when we worked on Frog Princess, that was a deliberate.
That was exactly where I was going. So someone pointed out that when I did my list, I didn't mention Princess and the Frog, and that was intentional because that's US. That's the, you know, like that's also, it's not part of that international, we're going to go to another country and look at things, and people will say, well, Lilo and Stitch was in Hawaii, and in my opinion, Hawaii is not a part of the US. So I never put those two things together, even though I recognize that technically by, you know, what people, but they also say that it's the Gulf of America now, so you can't pay attention to maps. So right.
I just want to say quickly too that Princess and the Frog has also been used to displace Song of the South from the theme parks, right? So that they take in Splash Mountain, which was the Song of the South ride, and turned it into a Princess Tiana Princess and the Frog ride. So it's like still all the same aesthetics, but it has, you know, now you don't have to deal with blackface and Tar Baby and this kind of stuff in the theme park in the way that you did until recently. So
yeah. Oh, can I just throw in a little because I just want to like illustrate, this is the attitude of how my colleagues were when we were in school, as well as at the Disney, you know, studios. But so by the time that I was in school and even at the studios, well, it wasn't an issue at the studios because we could access it, right? We could go to the archives and watch Song of the South or get the drawings or all this stuff. But when I was in school, and it's the same culture, it's the same mentality. Because, yeah, even this friend of mine who is a Black woman in the industry, like she's one of the only Black people, period, in school and a woman. But the mentality of, you know, this group too is like people didn't even talk about how it was problematic. They talked about how they were really annoyed because of the 9 Old Men. One of the people who, like, on a technical level is one of the stronger animators was this person named Milt Kahl, and he animated a lot of that. Like, and so everyone was just really upset that Disney didn't release it because they can't study Milt Kahl's animation, and they felt that was like really unjust. And like there was never a conversation. It was never a conversation about that it could be seen as problematic, that it misrepresented people, that it perpetuated harmful tropes. That wasn't part of the conversation. It was that they couldn't get Milk Hall's drawings. And then it was like, once they got into Disney, it was like, this is great because now I can access like the art that I couldn't, like, this is like, that's what I hope I can paint a picture of what our culture is, because that's also what I've been trying to do, even to explain where we're coming from when we make things like Andor and stuff. Like, this is the group. This is the people.
Right. And it's, you know, it's fascinating when you start thinking about who is behind it, because when people talk about Princess and the Frog, they talk about the young lady who voiced Tiana, right? So we'll give a lot of credit. Well, you know, the Black lady was able to voice it, right? And no one's thinking about the fact that the whole storyline, like everything behind it is white people, right? And so, like, to claim this like authentic story about like the Black girl in New Orleans and the whole, like, you know, like it's all one of the things that you said when you all were talking about and I can't remember which conversation it was, and Jared asked you about something and you were like, well, I think it was about the Battle of Algiers, like that comparison that you showed, and you were like, well, yeah, like they just looked it up. Right? Yeah. like the white people just Googled and figured, like, what's the first thing that we can come up with that we can use as a baseline to create this thing. And so this idea of like, oh, well, we got the first Black princess, but you got a Black princess that was written to existence by white people. And so, like, that's not DEI, right? Like, I mean, it is DEI, correction. That's exactly what DEI is, right? It's like this. It's like this presentation of like, just be happy because the Black princess is on the screen. Don't ask any questions about who created her or who wrote the storyline.
Or Mark Henry created her. If you want to know who the artist was that came, and in the 2D days, and that's also why, because I was one of the last people to be trained in this, just on an artistic thing, we had a lot more agency. There was a lot more responsibility and expectation in the training that we had as hand-drawn artists. So as a hand-drawn animator, when you got to a certain like level of status or accomplishment or seniority in the studio, you were also the person that got to be responsible for creating these characters. Like you could be the one to figure out who this character was, what she's going through, and you get to sit there and we love that. Like that's an aspiration for us, that we could just sit there and like get into this character and who is she and all this stuff. And Mark Henn is also like, he became known as the, like, you know, I loved his work. Like Mark Henn's work like inspired me a lot, like in terms of just the quality of his animation. Like he's he's very good at animation, and just like even the quality of movement and all these things. Mark Henn is the one that, I mean, him and Glenn Keane did Ariel together. Him and James Baxter did Belle together, but he did Princess Jasmine. He did Mulan. He did Tiana. He became like the princess guy. Like he had a great way of drawing girls or doing whatever, and he's a white Christian man, he's the one that made, like, sort of was there figuring out like, what would Tiana do, who is she, what is she doing, and then they hire, and he designed her look and everything. So Randy Haycock designed her best friend, but the two of them are like, you know, those are the people. Chris Sanders, who's now at DreamWorks, was the one that created the story of Lilo and Stitch, white, blonde American man. Even Lilo herself was actually animated by the same German American animator that did Jafar. Is Andreas Deja did Lilo, and so. Nani, Lilo's sister, was created and thought of and processed and developed, even story-wise, by Stéphane Sainte-Foy, who was a white Parisian animator incredible draftsmen. These characters were created by them.
Right. And so it's just, and I dropped it in the private chat, Jared. It's just a picture of Mark. It's just so people can get like a visual of like what we're talking about right now.
I tried to share it and crashed. So.
Okay, all right. So don't crash anymore. We can, but it's fascinating.
But
right?
There was a black, like there was Bruce Smith, and I think he supervised the villain. Bruce Smith supervised the villain. He's a black man at Disney. But the thing is, once you get like to be part of that club too, to a certain degree, like everyone's kind of very neoliberal, like you kind of like, he's not gonna, like, Bruce Smith is not gonna present revolutionary characters. Like they're all kind of having a similar, I mean, I don't know him, like I've met him a couple of times and he's super nice, and I don't want to speak on his behalf, but they're all engaging in conversations in the same like framework of what it is to create Disney characters, and that framework was developed initially by the 9 old men. We keep going back to them. That's right. They're our Bible, they're our
and it does go back to that old point that it doesn't really matter what the individual politics of each participant within the process of producing these media products are. It is the politics of the institution and the I would argue the media environment itself. So you could have revolutionary thinking people in the process, but their work will not be allowed to reflect that. They're not creating the ideological or political perspective that ends up on screen. So any more than, you know what I mean? So like any more than an individual journalist within a media operation being whatever, they're not going to impact, Again, I had Malcolm X's autobiography in my pocket as I put bombs on racks that were sent onto planes and dropped on Iraqi people. I'm sure they didn't care that I was reading Malcolm X when I wasn't doing that. I don't think that they gave a damn about that, and it had no impact on the mission of the Navy.
Yeah, it reminds me of that meme that comes up of like they say the next one will be dropped by women or something like that, yeah.
But I have to say, like, this is why I do feel it's important to speak out. But like, I didn't have like a gun to my head or something, but if I ever did get an opportunity to speak at an event, like especially early on in my career, and people would ask, like, they'd always do this panel, like, again, diversity things. You would never get, even if, like, people that I was supervising would get asked to be on the creative panel. But, like, for me, I had to be on the women in animation panel, and I never got to be, like, an artist in these spaces. But, like, when I go on these panels with these other women, we never lied, but we would never talk about certain realities. We would talk about like, oh no, we don't have those obstacles. Like everyone treats us really nicely. Like, it's really exciting working on these projects or whatever. And we would just channel the projects that were a bit more fun or the better days or whatever. But we would never you're on that stage and you can't call somebody out, or you can't. And I feel like, it's the thing that, sorry, I had a point with this, but I like, even to what you're saying, Jared, like that's something I've thought about a lot too, is that I'm like, we don't even know that we're soldiers. Like we don't, like, I think that's the thing that even makes us worse, is that like we are serving this kind of role and doing this kind of damage with that sort of like, I don't know what you want to call it, like spreadsheet damage or something, like like that, like you're like somebody that can make all these decisions and not necessarily always see, the consequences of it or whatever. But like, it's even worse because we're in this bubble of thinking that we're like artists and creating these beautiful
although
things.
We didn't either. Like that might be another point of similarity. Like none of us, particularly at the bottom ranks, like none of us understood what the plans were. We didn't know what the politics were. We definitely never saw the impact of the bombs once they were dropped. We never saw the picture. I never saw nothing. and they wrote that we dropped 800,000 tons or 80 something crazy like that just from our ship alone. So like I don't think I do think there is some similarity there that we didn't know. We knew we were in the military, but we didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't know what the impact of it was, and who it ultimately was benefiting, and what the ultimate goal was. I mean, all of that was a complete construct. So, but anyway, yeah, it's just fascinating. Yeah,
there and that the siloing of that information is also like this is how it works, right? So if you have people who are part of the group that is dropping bombs, they don't even understand that they're part of the group. So they definitely don't know how many bombs are being dropped or who they're being dropped on, right? Like the whole thing for me is so, and I don't want to go too far down the military train because this is what we're going to circle back to tomorrow. But this whole concept of understanding who is telling you the story that you are accepting as a representation of yourself, right? So like when as a little girl, and I was, I'm much old. So like when Princess and the Frog came out, I was long past like being a kid watching Disney movies, right? Like 2000 and what was that, 2009? Yeah, 2009. So in 2009, I had been working as a high school counselor for like a decade already. So I'm out of the realm. But I am watching young people who are watching Princess and the Frog and saying, oh, this is so cool. There's, and not even understanding that they are being sold a story about who they are, right? Taking it as representation, but you're not even being represented because the person telling the story is not you, right? It's not a Black woman who's from New Orleans writing the story of you understand what I'm saying? So like it like that whole piece of it, I think gets missed so much. And this is one of the things when we talked about Sinners, right? That had me like my head almost exploded trying to get people to understand, like you're talking about the music is being put together by a white person who don't even live in the country. Like, can we stop?
Yeah.
Right? Like, can we stop getting excited about these things that they're telling you? This is your representation. This is you. You get to be on screen. It's not you. It is the version of you that you are being sold by people who are not you because they want you to go buy a movie ticket. Yeah. Right? And so I'm like, the whole thing gets me so, I get so incensed when these conversations are happening. Like I remember when the live action Little Mermaid came out. Yeah. And there was this huge, oh, why is she Black? Why is she Black? And I kept saying, mermaids are not real. Like y'all are wilding out about the mermaid being Black. And you're not even understanding by doing that, they literally dehumanized her. Because mermaids are not fucking real. They're not a thing. Like, can we not? Like, why are we doing this right now? Right? And then Disney was so slick because they played it all up, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this was great for them because you get to pretend as if you are on, the right side of history because you let the Black girl play the mermaid. You don't acknowledge that mermaids aren't a thing. So, like, what does that really do for Black people if now like we get to play things that don't actually exist outside of like, now we're not human either, right? But also the playing up of like, I used to see these videos of like the little Black girl like seeing the preview and being like, oh my God, she's Black, and like being so excited. And I'm like, now y'all got these poor little girls like excited to not be fucking humans. Like, what are we doing right now? Like, how did we get to this space? And it's because this has been the continuous propagandizing of people utilizing movies, utilizing music, utilizing cartoons, like all of these things. And it's maddening for me, right? Like as a Black woman, it is infuriating watching people get excited about representation of Black people done by people who are not Black and representing things that aren't even human. What are we doing?
There's just to this on this very specific point. So this is from Alana Linton's book. She says outrage at diversification of Disney characters reached boiling point with the 2023 live action remake of The Little Mermaid starring Black performer Halle Bailey. One racist commentator on the epidermalization of fish apparently believes, from a scientific perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean. This is all italicized here. It should not need repeating that mermaids are fictitious beings. Nevertheless, the issue caused unfortunate lines to be written, such as, not all sea creatures are white. Rainbow fish are not white. Orcas are not all white. Even white fish are mostly black, brown, and green.
Yeah. Sorry. Just, yeah. It makes, sorry, because because this friend that I mentioned, I mean, she would be such a great person to have on the conversation. It's just that I don't want to, you know, like but she, you know, we were joking because I think it might have been, I don't know when it was, because she sent it to me, because especially while I was doing my graduate studies, I was really kind of trying to stepping away, and I was so focused on getting my schoolwork done. I wasn't watching a lot of, you know, entertainment and stuff, but she always messages me these things. And I think there was a similar conversation because there was some Christmas or Santa Claus movie, and they were going to cast the woman, this Black actress. I think she was in like Bridgerton or something, that she was going to be Mrs. Claus. And everybody was in an uproar about like having an opinion about this, about like, and I'm just laughing because of like, you know, it's like, yeah, because like Mrs. Claus isn't even a real like historic figure in life. Like this is like, so, but it's the same. Sorry, I was just kind of thinking about that too. It's just that these the way, I don't know, it's like I think what I find fascinating, and I don't know if it's also not being an American, because even though I grew up in Canada and you know, the majority of our media is American, we're very aware that these are American films, like they're not like Canadian films or something. There is like such a personal internalization of films or something like that. Like it's almost like, because I noticed that this kind of pushback or these conversations, I never got like, it happens more in the US. Sorry, I don't understand like I don't see people getting as defensive or debating films as this very culturally significant phenomenon at the level that these conversations happen in the US too. I don't know if I'm making sense.
It makes sense to me. And if you, I can't speak to the particulars of every country's history's relationship with film, but this country does have a very particular relationship with film. And this would be one area that I would slightly disagree with Renee's emphasis on profit. I don't think the number one goal is profit. I think the number one goal is ideological and political. And I think that's why those who ultimately end up involving themselves in investment and ownership and political involvement are not interested. They'll take losses if necessary financially. They want messages out. They want ideas out. And in this country, film has played, I mean, it's played a very particular role. So I'm not surprised that audiences would have been trained and conditioned by 2025 to sink in and have that media product have not only a particular impact, but play a very pivotal role, or maybe I'm saying the same thing, but play a pivotal role in how they see things politically, ideologically, and therefore want to get engaged. And then,
oh, go ahead. No, finish.
I was just going to come back that in terms of this social media space and the militarization of it, the intelligence involvement, there is, whether there's a direct influence or an indirect algorithmic and advertising influence. There is a whole new cottage industry of, again, the go woke, go broke, white nationalist YouTube media criticism space that both makes money and gets attention by calling out all of the or making all that is going wrong for particularly white America from their perspective be connected to what Disney is doing with putting all of this diversity in their films. So, which I think, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So here's my pushback about why I say it's profits first. Is because overall, even if they're willing to lose money in the temporary to maintain the propaganda, it is because in the end, if the propaganda goes away, their profit goes away. So I could be wrong, right? But it's like me looking like from the top and thinking at the top of this, it's about maintaining capitalism. So everything that's done, even if they say like, we'll take the hit right now, because later on we need to make sure that we don't take that hit. Like that's how I see it. And I could be totally wrong about that. Like this is just
a good way to solve it is that a good way to put it all together is that I think one of the flaws that I think is often committed when people talk about capitalism is they leave out the fact that it is a socio-economic construct, that there is a social component to it. So there is as much a need to shape what people think as there is a need to make money, because you can't have people being in support of a system that does this and produces wealth for a handful if you don't have an ideological component, which is where I always go back and forth with Marxists and my own Marxism. But I do think there's a
it's definitely
colonialism is the
it's definitely entwined. Like I don't
but anyway,
but we're now at 101 and I don't know like time. I don't know where the time goes. Like it's like I looked up and we had like an hour and then
well, we know if we don't say anything, Jared will have us here for 4 or 5 hours. So
it's true.
Cool to hang
and
out.
Deculturation is in the chat. So these are the marathon live streamers. So we might.
I'm just saying for the record, I feel like my participation in the Red Dawn conversation led to the longest millennials.
You got surpassed this week, Renee. You lost your record already. Yeah.
What's the record? Sorry, now I'm curious.
That was fast. Now, it's
4 hours and 2 minutes or something like that. Yeah.
That's wild.
I will say this. When I showed up in the chat, sorry, Jared, when I showed up in your chat 2 hours in on the Red Dawn thing the first time I saw it live, and you were like, "Oh no, we haven't even got to the movie yet." I was like,
"Yeah, we're working on our format a little bit." But I will say this, because I think the point that, to the extent that there's any disagreement or whatever between what Renee you're proposing and what Jared's proposing, I actually think our conversation tomorrow will help bridge some of those gaps, because I think to some extent, right, we can see that if Disney movies became less profitable at a certain point, and that became a problem for Disney, that the military industrial complex, which means also the state, right, and high technology, et cetera, that these spheres are willing to step in and figure out something that works for everybody involved. Let's just put it that way, right? Where you can have, technology and research and development benefiting the military, developing the state, developing, and, Disney and its separate entities, right, figuring out ways to become very profitable, and everybody gets something that, that works for them. And I think that's the thing about capitalism, is it's always important to understand it, both as a socioeconomic political system, but also just as a totality, right? That it is not necessarily about, the bottom line of one specific company. I think Disney and Hollywood in general has become less profitable. It's true. Like there there are not as many huge budget movies nowadays as there were in like the late 90s or whatever, but it is still very important, and it still obviously makes plenty of money. It's not like, we're talking about multi-billion dollar industries, but yeah. So anyways, I think we'll get into all of that tomorrow too.
Yeah, and I'm also curious, like, are movies costing less because with the technology, you don't have to, like, the whole, like, go into places and building entire places in order, like the idea that, like, to film what's the Christmas movie, and they built an entire town to film this Christmas movie, right? The what's it? Oh my God, how did I just blank on it? We watch it every freaking year too.
The Christmas Story?
No, the one where he jumps in the river and the angels and the wings and the, oh my God, he
Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. Thank you.
I do not watch that every year, but okay.
So I know. It's, again, one of my life's contradictions. But so for It's a Wonderful Life, they built that entire town was built just to film the movie, right? So there's finances that come with that I wonder, like, now that the tech doesn't require you to do that, is that why movies are costing less? Or is there something
costing less?
I don't think that.
I don't know if they are. I mean, that was just what Jared. I'm just going.
No,
off
I said the profits. So my point was primarily that movie theaters have become, like, they're starting to, like, box office numbers are not what they once were if you adjust it for, like, what money is now versus what it used to be. But a lot of it is that there are fewer movie theaters. Movie theaters are expensive to keep, and, like, then they haven't quite figured out, if they pivot to all kind of streaming, how to monetize it at the degree that you can when people go to the movie theaters, right? And so that's part of the tricky aspect. Like, this was you could see this during COVID, right, where they did a lot of stuff straight to Disney Plus or whatever, and they couldn't really figure out, like, how do we make the kind of profits that we do when we send it to the movie theaters. And so that's just kind of like,
but Samantha,
understood.
Yeah.
Got it.
I'll just, before you to invite or to segue to what you may be wanting to say, I just watched one of my YouTube Genius film criticism channels, and they said the reason Superman is already available, for instance, is because even before COVID, their argument, Jared, is that COVID just sped up a process Hollywood has been looking to move to anyway, which is eventually putting things in the household and letting people go ahead and pay for it there. And they seem to think that they're going to make even more money with using the movie theater as a promo for the $20 rental on stream. But anyway, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, either of you, whoever.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I also don't know if it's my bias, having, like, just freshly finished my graduate studies, but reflecting on everything that I've witnessed or been through, or I would argue that it's more part of a necessity for an imperial, I guess, capitalist also system, but maybe more ideologically, like, even the idea of not getting people together in spaces. I think that, like, all these, like, I think it's just very entangled with other agendas, with other, just the way we've been developing technology and everything too. I don't think that Hollywood is sort of riding the wave alongside it. I think it's entangled as part of that. So if these technologies are developed to keep us, like, if that is the intention with those technological developments, I think that Hollywood is part of that mechanism. Like, their decisions would be part of that too. And I would argue that it's more of a posturing. I don't know. It's more of the idea that they're saying, no, but we still love the theaters and we still want to do this for viewers. Like, I think that they'll put up a front, about it, and maybe actors do, and maybe some of the directors do, that they'll say, because I would go and say that if they'd ask me to go and like I'm like on one of the red carpets or the screenings, and I'd be like, yeah, I really love the theater experience, and you know, like we would talk about it, but ultimately, like, we wouldn't have any say over those decisions. So I think that that's sort of my leaning. Again, it's not my area. It's not areas.
You just said so much by saying like removing people and pulling all people into like one space. Like my head just exploded again. Like I'm like, shit, I hadn't even thought about that aspect, that like if you're not in the theater, like you're not even talking to other people. Now you're like isolated and watching that movie.
Some of the earlier media studies research that was done on films involved the reverse of what's happening now. That they knew people would even use the movie theater, not for the film itself. Some people just, you know, it was a break from the heat. They could get some sit down, they could socialize, get some air conditioning in some cases. And then the film would be the background, never mind all the newsreels and all the other stuff they were using early on to propagandize everybody. But now that everybody is aggregating in their homes and they want more of an atomized, specifically targeted population, they're thinking this is even better. Get rid of the movie theaters. We don't have to split any profit with anybody or whatever. It's not really a split, but give them any money. And then you don't have to worry about, to your points already being made, people gathering unsanctioned, actually sitting next to somebody where it hasn't been, you know, in some other way specified as being okay. So yeah, I mean, yeah.
There's an interesting. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so Cedric Robinson talks about, actually, in Forgeries of Memory and Meaning, like the anxiety that the British ruling class had about the theater, and that the theater was a place of rebellion and revolt. And so they actually, you know, there was a period at which the theater was outlawed in England, and they only did productions for the royal court, basically. But it's interesting because I also think, I mean, I totally agree on the atomization point. I mean, generally, that's like a big thrust of everything. It's why, you know, we're all on the internet, we're all on our smartphones, we're all on these streaming services, right? Because it's like, it's entertainment to you, to keep you pacified and atomized. And I think that that is the intent. I also would slightly question whether, I mean, certainly in my lifetime, I have not really seen movie theaters be a space of like rebellious, you know, subversive activity going on either. And, you know, I can't really count on my hand the number of times that like I've had real conversations with people, you know, even coming out of the movie theaters, and usually it would be somebody that I knew or something like that, you know. And so I think that, but I do think that there is something there. I mean, certainly, you know, I think also my question would be more, maybe it's
accidentally.
Yeah. I mean, it may be an anxiety, how like based that anxiety is in actual reality, I think is another question. And it might be, to your point, Jared, that, you know, Disney doesn't want to split money with AMC in some kind of way, you know, or whatever. Like, yeah.
Well, they probably own both. Like that's the thing, right? So, but I just have like two little things that popped into my head, because I really like, at least of all of the, like I like, when I look at it, I'm like, I've lived like across most of the Anglosphere, like the global Anglosphere, and you know, they're all like kind of parallel, like, you know, it's like if the British Empire split and then there's parallel universes or something that develop in each country. But something that's interesting, like, you know, with what you were saying, one thing I really loved when I was living in London is I actually went to go to the theater more than I would go see movies. Well, just because also I'm like working on these movies like all day. And I came from like a dance background initially too. And so I've always loved live theater. But something that I thought was really interesting, and I think it kind of overlaps with what you were just saying, like in London, you go to the theater and it's a social event. It's a place that you come, like, so even if people are not, like in Canada, if you go to the theater, it's because you're bougie and you're like into the theater or something. But there it's kind of like, oh, you could go to see a show for £5, or you could, or, you know, and theater, like every time I would go alone a lot of the times, and I would get to know everybody that was in front of me, next to me, behind me, like what do you think of it? Like, what do you, and it really is a place where people will engage. Like, obviously this isn't like, these might've just been the spaces that I went into, but I find it very different than, like, for example, if I went to a theater or dance production here, or when I lived in LA, I often was just like, if I went by myself, I was by myself the whole time. Like, I'd be in the lobby and people are just like, even at an intermission, they don't talk to you. Or when you go to see a movie, like, people don't talk to you. Whereas in London, there's even a culture with movies of having these weird, like, little vintage theaters, or like little, like, I don't know, just kind of different things. And then people want to talk after. And so I always thought that was kind of interesting, just because I'm always, again, like I was saying to Jared before, we're kind of taught to observe our audiences. So I feel like I was sort of doing that mentally in the background. But I'd be interested, because this is where I think you all have more insight into this than me, but something, because I literally only read, this was like 1 week of one of the modules that I was doing in my graduate program, but something that really stuck out to me that I've sort of put on the side that I wanted to read more was, like, we were doing some conversations around like art and art as activism, and I forget who the scholar was, because I wish I could credit this properly, but there was one thing, because we were studying like Antigone, I think, like different interpretations, and like Antigone and Ferguson, and some different styles. But that module, like, we were looking at how there was one article that I read that was comparing like how theater and democracy evolved together. This is probably stuff you've already come across, like this idea that, like, for those that had access to democracy and like, for whatever you want to call it, in ancient Greece, that there was a lot more exchange that was possible with your representatives or with politicians. And likewise, Greek theater at that time also allowed audiences to get into an exchange even with the performers. And then as theater eventually, as politics changed, theater alongside it, you can see how eventually it was put into the kind of space where the audience and the stage became more separate from each other, that eventually the audience was put in the dark and you just observe what's happening on the stage. Like, fast forward to where we are now, where you go to see a movie and you don't even have a chance to talk with the screen or exchange with it. And it kind of mirrors how our, political setup is as well, especially with people that are, in the governing positions of our countries and stuff. And so, sorry, I'm sort of rambling a little bit, but it's that makes me think about that maybe they do want us more isolated. Like, if we look at this kind of 2 millennial evolution of the theater entertainment experience, where going with it, is that something you've come across? Like, I mean, like, because again, I just read that, like, that's like a week of reading, like, that was like, that's where I want to explore more. But it really just stuck with me, I think, just because of my work experience and stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally onto something. I mean, this can all be politicized and socialized differently, right? And so, like, one thing I did a year or so ago when I worked at Making Worlds is, like, we brought Mtume, folks know, does the Imperial 80s with me. Shout out to us.
Shout out to Mtume. He'll be here tomorrow, by the way, people.
Yeah, he's going to be with us tomorrow. Actually, and it would be a good thing to bring up with him. But, if we do screenings of movies within a politicized space with folks who are interested in, like, socially and politically engaging, right? You can do much more with that than we're used to doing in the movies. And it's even interesting when we think about, before the movies start in the United States, all the demands that are placed upon us, these corporate demands of, like, silence your cell phones, It's, on one level, that makes sense, right? Because, of course, people get distracted and people are there to see the movie. But part of it also is this notion that we have to be quiet, or that we have to be silent. I should say, like, not all cultures or groups of people even in the United States adhere to that in the way that white suburban audiences usually do. But I think that, it's definitely a form of trying to prepare us to, like, be docile, not engage with one another, and just afterwards just leave, rather than, and of course you're in this very corporate space. They want you in and out, right? They're, you know, all of that is there. But I think that, yeah, I mean, one, I think the point you're making about when you go back in the history of theater in its development through Europe, there is a lot of this, like like I said, like the ruling class in these societies was often very concerned by what was going on at the theater. Like they they were like, how do we get people to not do what you're talking about, like to not, you know, talk to each other and rabble rouse and, you know, see certain characters as, you know, rebellious or whatever. And so there's been a long project of them trying to sort out, how do we create something where we can get our messages across, but it's not a space where people are also sort of organizing against us. And I think people that are organizers should also think about that and think about, how do we change our form of engagement, even beyond what we do here of like trying to critique these things, of saying like, how do we get people together in space to watch and to think about these things critically, but also to show our own movies, which are not going to be big Hollywood productions or whatever, but where you have people who are politicized that are actually trying to make something different, where it's a different kind of discussion also that's possible on the film. So yeah, I think that what you're talking about is absolutely a real thing.
And then there's also like the nonprofit gig, right? So like what may start out as political art then becomes a focus for a nonprofit, and then now, like, you know, now they're trying to raise money so they can like show the political art, and then it changes the whole purpose of what, you know, what was there. And you know, I guess it was like 2 weeks ago now, we had Brian Quoba on, who wrote a book on Hubert Harrison, and one of the things that I was fascinated to learn about was how like the Harlem Renaissance was like this creation of like white people who wanted to like dictate what art was going to be the art that came out of Harlem at the time, so that they could profit off of it. Like it's like this fascinating, like, just circle of hell that we're living in, where like, you know, like things just become, they stop being about like the learning and the lesson and the understanding. Like I do screenings a lot here in Jersey, and we always try to do a conversation. Like you don't just show the movie, right? Like you let people talk, you bring organizations in, you show the movie, you do a panel, you do question and answer, you have a conversation to extend it, so that it's not just about like sitting and watching this thing on the screen, right? Like it's about absorbing the information and kind of moving towards, how do you utilize this thing to actually be of purpose for the organizing. But again, like Jared just said, like those are the movies that they're not going to be blockbusters, right? They're not going to become a thing. And, you know, you had mentioned, I think in your first conversation with Jared, like, you know, when people are like, well, you make your own thing then, and you're like, all right, but these movies cost like $1 million a minute to make. Like, like, you know what I mean? Like, how is that going to work, right? And so it's one of
right, really bake sale,
right. Like it's one of those things that always, you know, it plays in my mind, and something, and I don't remember if it was like, I don't know who said it. I feel like it was somebody on here who said, like, you cannot be rich, radical, and popular. Like those three things in existence at the same time in one person is never going to happen, because in order to be radical, you can't be.
It's Dr. CBS, I think, right?
I wish I could remember the first person who I heard say it, and I was like, fuck, that's so true. Like you can't do it.
I can't help it because I'm going to get laughed at on the side, but that has been called my iron triangle. You can't be rich, popular, and radically political at the same time. Rich, famous, and radically political at the same time. So I just want to. acknowledge. No, not you. I'm acknowledging my double O African friends that are going to be on my text messages. and because if I just sit here and not acknowledge it, I'm going to get clowned. So I got to do it.
Listen,
that's but absolutely. It's all.
So in the interest of not, I like, we're coming back tomorrow, and I need to. I want desperately. This is so selfish of me, y'all. I don't really care about this. I want desperately to like talk to Sam off camera, and so like we gotta wrap soon so that I can. So we can have this like non-conversation, but then we're back tomorrow.
And the link is already in the show description if you're not signed up already.
And then Tume will be here, and so we can all. And this is like we can continue for a little bit. Don't worry about it, Samantha. You have time to like we're not like on a true time crunch. But I just I
just want to interject a legal caveat that I just want to like throw in there because. Just in case, like with all the stuff I've been saying, I just want to, just so that nobody's like going on my IMDb and being like, she must be talking about this project. A lot of when I went as a contractor, I started my own company. So a lot of the work I do wasn't as Samantha on my IMDb. So I just want to put that out there, like, just so that people are like, she must be talking about this director. Because if you went to my IMDb, it might seem like that. So that's my little legal caveat that I was like, I should just put that out there so that people are aware of that and don't, because I'm one of those people that would go and try to like deduce things. So I just want to say that so that a director that could have been an awesome person doesn't get blowback or something too.
Appreciate it. I just say this too. Like, I think that to underscore what folks have already said, but I do see it as, bravery on your part to like come out and say as much as you have, knowing that the people that you are talking about are powerful and vindictive and litigious and all of that. And so I just think it's really important that folks do that. You've talked about like not having a big circle of folks that, you have as, community to kind of, share these critiques with and have your back and that kind of thing. And so I think it's important also for folks that are watching this too, to follow and all of that. And like, just know that there could be a time when you do need support for, for this stuff, and that we need to show up then too, not just when you're saying the things that we want you to tell us because we want to know how it all works on the inside. That so I just want to say that as well.
Thank you.
No, right on. And just to bring it back to my hate on my faculty meeting situation yesterday, where we were in a meeting talking about the collapse of liberal arts in favor of STEM and militarization of the university. This is my interpretation. And they talked about how we now have not an economics department and a political science department, but a combined department that includes both, with only one chair, of course. And then someone made a joke about this being the university thinking it's doing political economy. so
which they were separated particularly to avoid that, by the way. Like, that's the whole point.
And then, of course, they wouldn't let an actual political economist in the building. Like that person doing that work would literally not be allowed to even be in the building, much less hired to do a job there. So thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Jared. Absolutely. You got a circle here. And I echo all of the sentiments, including that last one made by Jared about when and where we show up and needing support and all of that. So again, the link to tomorrow's show is in the show description. Looking forward to it. We're gonna get out of here so that Renee can have her private one-on-one session, therapy session with Samantha. And of course, to the undefeated chat and everybody on the screen, peace, because we know you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And we'll see you next week with more. Saturday. with Renee.